Okay, so Rock, tell us about your
Go ahead.
background and how did you first get into UX research?
Yeah. Thanks, Elaine, and hi everybody. So yeah, I'm in user research. In some ways, I feel like I got to it late in my career. I did an engineering degree at University of Waterloo. Always thought I was going to be an engineer building stuff on the technical side. I don't think UX and HCI was really commonly known then. So Waterloo, is the university campus is right beside BlackBerry, and that was sort of when sort of pagers and eventually smartphones took off. Um, and I would have loved to be part of that, but I was going through engineering, and I eventually just by sort of I was just hopping around and eventually landed at just I started working at a university and did part-time classes, and I'm like, oh, there's HCI, and I'm like, this sounds really interesting. Combination of design and psychology and computer science, and I'm like, oh, I actually quite like this, and that was I think the first time I realized that I could influence design without being a designer myself. I wouldn't say I'm particularly creative. I'm more analytical.
Mm.
And then I really loved the classes I was taking and analyzing things and coming up with improvements, and decided I wanted to know more of it. So I did a graduate degree at UBC,
Mm.
and we can sort of talk about sort of the value of that.
Okay.
But I think here, especially in Vancouver, sort of like I graduated maybe more than 10 years ago, UX research was not really popular. You would see maybe a posting every 2 or 3 months. And
Mm.
so I actually started at SAP for a while. I was just more involved in industrial academic collaboration and research, like innovation processes. But then I joined the UX team and said, hey, I can do research. I'm sort of trained for it. Can I help there? And so that's where I started finding this really great fit between my training, my interests, and UX research. And since then, I've been very interested in just getting better at it, getting involved in the field, in the community, and really just honing my craft in that area. So that's how I landed here.
Okay. And I also know you also help organize the Radical Research Conference every year, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Is one coming up this year?
Not this year. Yeah, I think we're gonna do it every 2 years.
Every 2 years. Okay, great. And so at which point did you understand that UX research and UX design are two different things? Like, how did you know about that?
I think very early on. I think as I was saying, like if I never saw myself as a creative person,
Mm,
artistically, and I think that there's that brainstorming aspect of coming up with designs, which I think I could do, but I felt like somebody better trained could do it better. But I
mm,
was very analytical, and I loved sort of getting into things and researching. And so I think once I found that there was a role for me in that
mm.
space, I'm like, okay, great. It's definitely not design, but I can do research.
Okay, perfect. So tell us a little bit about what you do at Samsung now.
Yeah.
Your team
Um,
do.
yeah. So Samsung is a huge company, and they have so many different products. So we operate in the business unit of mobile devices. So we support the creation of devices. I mean, the whole business unit does that, tablets, smartphones, things like that. But my particular unit here in Vancouver, we work on enterprise software. So
Mm,
essentially, imagine a company that buys 1,000 of our devices for their employees. Um, Setting up manually would just take so much time. So we produce tools that allow them to automate the enrollment, the securing, the configuration of all these different tools, these phones, and then managing it. essentially that allows them to scale from like 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 devices.
Oh, okay. So it's mobile phones for B2B
Yeah,
employees.
that's
Ah,
right. And
okay.
we create the software tools for it.
Oh, okay. So somebody in the company would manage all these phones
Yeah,
handed out to employees.
it's the
Okay.
IT administrators. Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. Interesting. Interesting.
So our team supports the, sorry, back to your question about what our team does. So we're embedded on the UX design team. We're part of the UX team. We're embedded there. There's a product team and like product managers and the dev side. And so we support our designers. We research, um, our users, our customers, really bringing in that insight to help the designers, the product team, and pretty much the whole product team to make better decisions. So we use a
Mm,
very various methods to do that.
okay. What's the ratio between designers and researchers at Samsung, like in your division?
Yeah, so just in my division, which is different from others, but now we have four researchers and around 8 designers.
Oh, okay. For
Yeah,
researchers, designers. And what
so I
what
would
about
say that's probably pretty research heavy if compared to other teams.
okay.
Yeah.
How about like tech people? Like uh when
Yeah,
hmm,
that one's a bit harder for me to say because there are a number of teams in Vancouver, but we also have teams, global teams all over the world as well, and I'm not sure how big they are.
I see. And when you say designers, do you mean interaction designers or visual designers, or is there a difference, or it's together?
Yeah, I think ratio-wise, we have more interaction designers than visual designers.
Hmm.
But the visual designers do some interaction, and the interaction designers do some visual design.
Okay.
So there's a blend. And I did forget to mention that there is another team of designers, maybe about 6 at another site.
Mm. And what do they do? Like the
Yeah, so interaction design and visual
interactions.
design for similar products, but we support them as well. So the ratio, I don't know, maybe 12, 12 designers to 4 researchers.
I see. I see. Okay. Yeah, actually, I'm also curious about this question because Samsung is a Korean company, right? So why in North America and why in Vancouver?
That's a good question. I think it's my guess is it's historic because there are really large UX teams in Korea.
Ah,
But the technology that our software is based out of I believe, came primarily out of the US. And
ah,
so a lot of the developers are there, a lot of the designers are there and really birthed a lot of our solutions. And so Vancouver started working with them, and so there's that legacy that continues on.
okay, great. All right, let's dive into the main topic then. So who can do UX research?
Yeah, so that's a really really good question. As you know, that's a pretty hot topic in research communities right now.
Mm-mm.
Just to give context, if you're not aware, there's one camp that says, only researchers can do research. Like they're the best, they're trained, they are aware of their biases, and really only they can do it. There's another camp that says, well, you know what? True as that might be, there's just not enough researchers to go around. And, there's such a big need for research that we should democratize it. We should empower anybody who's uh, able to do research to do research.
Mm,
And there is a bit of a back and forth and maybe sort of I wouldn't say argument, but active discussion between these two camps.
okay.
So I think to answer your question, I think it's helpful to specify the question as who can do UX research for what or for a particular purpose. So is it something where you are doing it for yourself to learn about the product so that you can make decisions? Or are you doing user research so that a multi-billion dollar company should needs research to figure out what product to pursue next.
Mm,
The scope and the sort of the demands for that type of research are very different.
mm,
I I want to use an analogy, if I may, just to sort of illustrate this. Um, there's actually quite a bit of parallels between doing research and doing cooking.
mm,
And so I just want to, I bet that in the audience today, we have varying cooking skills. Maybe some of you hate cooking and would only do it if you really need to, but you could survive if you had to. And then some of you are passionate about cooking and you are very good at it, and then you seek recipes, you think about it all the time, you're always trying to get better. So I guess the question would be, like, imagine if your supervisor or the boss or the CEO of your company came over. How comfortable would you be? Like, what would you do for a meal for this person? Would you cook it by yourself, or would you hire, to do takeout or do catering and things like that? And the reason why I bring this up is because when we ask who can do UX research, I think there's some parallels to, like, who can cook. Well, I can cook. My kids might disagree, but like I can make enough so that I can live on it. But it's not necessarily something I would volunteer to do. I'm passionate about, or like if there was like a very important guest come over, that I would cook for them. So I think bringing it back to research, it's really about for what, um, and for who. So who's going to be consuming this? Is it myself? Is it a team? Is it like the entire organization that is counting on this research?
mm,
What's the impact of getting this right? What's the impact of it getting it wrong? What's the risk of this sort of decision that's being made?
mm,
And so I think that overall my stance is that who can do you research? I think anybody can, sort of like anybody can cook, but
mm.
it really comes down to, um, you know, for what and for what purpose, and are you best suited for that?
Mm. Can you help the audience, like, because some of the audience might be new to UX research or user research. I mean, there are different ways to say it, right?
Yeah.
Can you explain, like, in your point of view, what is UX research or user research? Like, what are the process, and so that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. That's a great question. So, um, our team is going through this book reading club. It's called the book we're discussing is called Just Enough Research by Erica Hall, and she in her book is encouraging, um, researchers, designers, anybody in the product team, that you can get involved in research. And so her definition is that it's systematic inquiry. So it is a way of asking questions and efficiently getting at answers that can help you. Yeah, it is a good book, right? It is to help you to, um, make better decisions, to improve your product, to really understand who you're designing for, so that you can take action on it, improve the product, services, and better serve a particular user. So really, our process starts with, we talk to the people who are making decisions and who are interested in research, and we ask them what do they want to learn.
Mm,
Given that, then we figure out what ways, what tools, what methods we can use to actually uncover some of those things. And the key is in a timely and systematic way. Um, UX research is different from academic research in that we have different time constraints. Oftentimes, it's much shorter. It has to line up with the decisions that are made in a product team.
mm,
So we're often not doing things in an ideal time frame, whereas academic and scientific research can be longer, can be done a lot more rigorously, and of course it's shared more widely, so
Mm.
that so people can use it, but of course it takes more time. But yeah, we go from research question to method to coming up some kind of finding, and then we spend a lot of time, more than I expected at first, really communicating that, sharing our recommendations, and trying to take what we found and to influence decision making.
Mm. Can you cite some examples on the kind of methodologies that you would use for UX research?
Yeah. So so there are two general sort of type of ideas. One is exploratory, or some might call it generative, where we're trying to understand a space,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of sort of what was designed. And then there's evaluative, where you have something you designed or some concept that you came up with and things you want to test.
Mm.
So on the testing and evaluative side, you might do usability testing, you might do surveys, you might even interview a customer to see what their experience is like. On the sort of understanding and the more exploratory research, you could still use interviews and surveys, but the
Mm.
questions are slightly different. It's like, how do you perform your tasks? What are the challenges? What have you seen worked? And it's really questions that are are, are seeking to understand the user and how they do their work.
Mm. Okay, and in terms of time frame, like how short, like long is it compared to academic research?
Yeah, so the academic research could be months, could be years. I know it's some of the social sciences that are quite rigorous can can be a year or more. And in industry, I mean, it's not uncommon for our usability testing to take place over 2 weeks. If we want something much quicker, it's like a week. Or if it's something where there's an assumption made, and but we have to make a decision tomorrow, that we might just quickly ask a bunch of people questions, that just we call it guerrilla testing or guerrilla interviewing, where we just go and talk to as many people as we can, just to get a quick and dirty data set.
Mm.
But I think it really comes down to like what decisions are being made and how much confidence we want in the data. If it's a question that's kind of important, it's not, if we don't get it right, it's not a huge deal, but it's still, we want to do it properly, we can spend less time. But
Mm.
if it's a big decision where we're dedicating teams and months and months of resources towards it, we want to do more thorough research to really get it right.
Mm. So since Samsung is a big company, like how much substantiation do you need to make a decision, like in terms of qualitative and quantitative data?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question.
Mm.
Um, I can't speak for all of Samsung, and from personal experience, and we can talk about this more because I think it does tie into sort of who can do research and getting
Mm.
started and so on. But I think it usually depends on who is consuming the research.
Mm.
Research I think is about gaining confidence, but in general, unless you can ask everybody in the world, which you can't, you're sampling, and so there's you can never get 100% confidence, and so it's really about seeing how much time you want to spend to get confidence in something, to get enough confidence to move forward, because research also is one of those resources where it's not free. Somebody's paying for my salary, and so it's really up to our stakeholders to decide, well, hey, Rock, I have this decision, and I want you to spend a week on it versus 3 months on it,
Hmm.
and uh, and it's worth it because I'm going to be spending so much money on this decision that it's worth it to spend this much time. Or maybe this is, it's a small decision, but I still want to get a little bit of feedback, so I'll get a little bit less is fine.
Hmm.
So I think it depends. It really depends on the decision. It depends on the culture. Each stakeholders is different. Some are very resistant towards research and think it's a waste of time. Some love it. They want to get involved. And some people are convinced by just hearing one customer say something, and they're like, "Yep, let's, that totally makes sense. We're going to pivot and solve this problem." So it's I find it's a very human, relationship related work, which I
Ah,
actually really love. And I think maybe if it's any encouragement for the people on the call, which is, sure, there's some technical skills, but a lot of the research and what makes a good researcher are the social skills.
mm.
The fostering stakeholders, working well together, working more collaboratively. Those are hugely important.
Mm. So, in terms of qualitative and quantitative, like when we say like how do you convince people, right? Because a lot of the UX research is more qualitative compared to market research. Sending out massive surveys and stuff. Like, how do you convince stakeholders with small sample size?
Yeah, yeah. I again, like, a super good question, and I have found from my experience, it it depends, and that's not a very satisfactory answer. I think that, um, I once heard this talk, actually at Radical Research. Um, I can't remember the speaker's name off the top of my head, but she was talking, and I won't spend too much time about this, but she was talking about this idea. There was this Greek figure in the, I think, in so some mythology, where she was cursed by knowing what would happen, but that nobody would believe her.
Okay.
And then so she was going around and she would say things, and then just nobody would believe her, and she'd just go crazy, and that's why it was a curse. And sometimes she brought this up because sometimes researchers feel this way. It's just like, I have all stuff that just nobody's believing me. And her conclusion was like, culture beats data
Mm,
almost all the time. Like, the culture in your company will always be more important than data. You and Erica Hall says this too, which is, the amount of data that you bring, you if somebody's not convinced, like, it's pretty rare that you can win that argument just through more and better data.
oh.
And so what I have found, and this maybe touches on what we'll be talking about, which is, by convincing us, somebody, one is to recognize that not everybody will be convinced equally. Some people will have had good experiences with research, or are research minded. Some people might have had bad experiences with research. And that's sort of out of our control. We meet the stakeholder where they are.
Mhm.
And I have found that it helps to find the stakeholders who are just more, um, they value research, it resonates more with them, they're more of a champion, and just work with that person. Like, it doesn't require convincing. They just believe in already, and then you collaborate and make something awesome with them.
Right.
And then that starts shifting the culture. Other people will start seeing it. They will start saying, hey, there's some benefit, and it's tangible, and, oh, if it worked for that person, it might work for me. And then, and hopefully maybe the person you worked with will be convincing other people,
Mm.
just through, the value that was brought. So I've actually found that to be personally comforting, because I'm terrible at sales. I'm terrible at convincing people and trying to sell. I'm not built for that. Um, but that, I found, and I've heard from other researchers, it helps to work with the people who are already sold.
Mm. So that means if you look for a job, especially the first UX job, you better make sure the company actually values research, right?
Yeah, yeah, or at least one. It could be that just the manager who's hiring, um, and maybe if everybody else hates it, if you have that one champion and can give you an opportunity, that might be enough for a while.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you get started? Get the experience if somebody's just starting from scratch.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to leave people with is if you'll sort of if you consider that UX research is like systematic inquiry, I think that most people here sort of know how to get to do that. If you think of, like, for example, trying to find a good restaurant,
Mm.
um, I think people are already familiar with, like, sort of, going to a good source, reading reviews, understanding that there might be some bias behind what people say, and there's better ways of getting information. Um, I think that people already sort of can have a good starting point already with starting to do research.
Mm.
Um, so that's one thing. I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, I'm not a researcher, or I don't have that in my title, or experience, I can't get started. I think that everybody can, as long as you sort of um, put in that objective lens in terms of trying to get data, and just watching out for possibilities of bias, and like that sometimes people will say something because they think you want to hear it, that what people say might not actually be what they think. As long as you have that sort of analytical mindset, that will get you quite a far. um, I think that, coming down to that analogy of, research is sort of like cooking. I think that people can get started by doing two things. One is doing research for yourself, and it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't necessarily have to be awesome or big, and you have room to make mistakes. I think as long as you're sort of aware of your own limitations, that this is sort of like a do-it-yourself type project,
Mm.
I think that's a great place to get started. The other part too is to work with somebody who's more experienced,
Mm.
to join with their project. I think that you there's actually a difference between contributing to research, which I think everybody can do, and leading a research project,
Mm.
which I think if it's a more complex, that you want somebody more experienced. And so, if you at your company there's a researcher, or maybe a senior designer or product manager who's doing some research, um, they I believe that they would really love to get your help, to do note taking, to observe, to help in the analysis, to help in the communication. Those are all part of research, and I think working with somebody who's more experienced is a really fantastic way of getting started.
Mm. Can I just clarify when you say research for yourself, what did you mean? Like
Yeah. So
pick up
for
a project or
yeah. So for example, oh, sorry, just my son is asking for access to the iPad. So I think it's like, in any design project, let's say you're a designer and you have some project, if you have some questions, and I think that's part of research, is just to know what the assumptions you're making and what things you have less confidence in. If you have those things, you can do research to try to answer those things. Maybe you won't be 100%, but you can try. So for example, a simple one could be like, are my users using my product on a PC versus a mobile? If you don't know, I think you can do a little bit of research that would help you a lot to figure out which ones they do more, they use more of. So whether it's like you ask people around you, or you go to the analytics team in your company to try to get that information.
Mm,
Um, Research also involves uh, we call it desk research,
mm,
which can be useful just to look at existing research out there,
mm,
competitive analysis, or just reading, um, UX guidelines, pulling that information to inform your design. I
mm.
think those are good places that you can do yourself to get started, and it is UX research.
I see. So what kind of backgrounds, of people can get into UX research? Do you need a PhD in HCI like yourself? Or
Yeah, so I think I can answer by saying like, um, so you know this, Elaine, but I want to share this with people. Just that, so as part of my work at Samsung, so I've been hiring um, co-op students, and a lot of our co-op students have a design background. They're out of the SFU CEP program, but we do have people who I have one maybe a couple co-op students ago who has a business background and in computer science. Didn't really have much of a design background, but she was very curious. She um, really liked making connections and understanding. The first co-op student I had, she had a criminology background,
oh wow.
and she, which is funny when we were like, okay, well, you study criminals, now you get to study users, and she's like, oh, maybe they're similar methods. Um, but she was great, and she like it was no problem for her to sort of figure out our methods and support research. So I would say like background itself is important. Some formal training can definitely help you, but to get started, I mean, in this case, they were working with me so I could supervise and I could lead and coach them. And so I think that's a scenario that I'd recommend for people is to find that type of either mentorship or just being involved where you can get feedback.
Mm,
But I think I think that it's less important to have a specific background, and it's more important that you're open, you're curious, you're really good with people, and that you're, I think humility is actually a huge part.
mm,
Just knowing that you might not know all the answers.
mm,
So I think a lot of what makes a strong researcher are actually sort of attitude, your way of just being analytical, being curious, being skeptical enough. That's actually pretty important.
mm. So, as UX designers, usually there's a portfolio. Like, how would you recommend a UX researcher to show those skills, when they're just starting?
Yeah. So for researchers, I think there's two steps. One is if you haven't already, and I think many in UX as in a profession as a field will know this already. First is to really understand the basic flow of how design comes about. Um, Data evidence driven design. So it's the really understanding your user, understanding the problem, brainstorming design, you know, getting at some possibilities, doing some tests, and then you sort of keep iterating. That it doesn't actually take a lot time to figure out, but I think you have to be really solid in that.
Mm,
And then for the portfolio, it is to show all those steps and how you went through it, decisions you made. Um, Oftentimes in a portfolio, there's a lessons learned at the end. Why that's important, and this is another sort of point I wanted to make, is for UX research, it's a craft, and your last speaker said this. UX research is a craft in that nobody, I firmly believe this, that nobody is a total master at it. Everybody can learn and do better, and and so your portfolio doesn't need to show perfection.
mm,
It has to show that you at least understand the process and that you can identify the limitations and would and how you would do it better the next time.
Mm, right. Um, so what about like for a smaller company? Actually, we know a lot of designers. There might be like one person in a tech startup, and then if the colleagues don't understand it, they have no time to do research. Like they're just asked to change the design, no time to recruit users. Like, what do you suggest them do?
So I think it comes down to like so there's two things. One is um, if the project demands really rigorous research and is betting, so to speak, the farm on this research for their survival for the next couple of years, I would say like that's a big ask. Don't even try. Like if you don't have experience, the company there should hire somebody. Like if they're spending, if this is going to impact millions of dollars in decision making, they should just hire somebody. But I think if it's a more manageable, lower risk project where you might not have a ton of experience, maybe that is suitable to try it out, to to do some research and to get some results. I think that one thing I wanted to share is that I think with many things, um, I think somebody who's new to research just needs to be careful to understand their limitations because the amount of experience you have affects your ability to assess the quality of something that comes out. So so I'll bring it back to the cooking example. Like so for myself, I don't have much experience in a particular cuisine. Let's say it's like African cuisine. If I go to a restaurant, I cannot tell what's served to me if it's African food, if it's good or bad. And so, but if I have more experience with it, I've tried a variety, and somebody's coached me and said, "Hey, this is excellent," or "This is like very like not very good," then I have a better idea. And I think the same is similar for research in that if you don't have as much experience with research, without getting outside help, it's actually quite hard for you to tell whether your research was solid or not. You
Mm,
will come up with a finding, but it might be hard for you to tell whether it's a very solid finding or maybe it's something that is quite shaky because of all these limitations or because there was some bias and things like that. So in those cases, I would always recommend, if it's possible, find somebody with more experience
mm,
and just get feedback. Ask them just to review your plan, review how you did things. Um, it's okay to not know and it's okay to make mistakes. I firmly believe that, and just to get some fresh eyes on your work, and I think that will help a lot. So
mm.
you could do the research, but be cautious that it might not be as great as you think of it is. If somebody else who's more experienced than you thinks it's really strong, then yeah, that increases the likelihood that this is good research.
Where do you suggest junior people to find mentors or somebody to help, you know, advise them?
Yeah, yeah. So there's at least a couple places. One is within the company. So you would hope, although I know you can't take it for granted, you would hope that sort of the senior product people within your company would would be good at research, or I mean, at least they would be able to identify good research.
Mm,
Maybe they've had experience, so on. So look within the company itself.
mm,
And then secondly, it would be reach within your professional network. Um, uh, I've had people sort of, and it's not an invitation, but I wouldn't hesitate, to chat with people. I've done that before, where they're like, "Hey, I'm not quite sure what the best method is to look at this particular research thing. Can I chat with you for 15 minutes just to get your feedback?"
mm,
Um, I think that's very doable, especially in this sort of LinkedIn world, just to get a bit of feedback.
mm.
Yeah. So
Any
internal and
communities
external.
in the radical research conference where people can get connected?
Yeah, so there are a number of Slack groups. I almost feel like almost each meetup has their own Slack group.
Okay.
So Radical Research does have one, but I know that a more active one is the UXRConf.
Mm.
That's a really big one, and there's a Slack channel about like ask me questions.
Oh, okay.
So I would say, yeah, look at these various active meetups, and it's quite easy to post. And I think the thing I love about researchers, and I'm a bit biased, of course, but I think people they're willing to help. They are really supportive and will help out a stranger who they can.
Mm, great. And how do you educate your colleagues or clients, on the value of UX research?
Yeah, that comes back to your question about convincing.
Mm,
Um, two ways. One is showing showing the value that you could provide to somebody else. That's that has been a big one too. I've had colleagues who were skeptical about research, felt it took long, but when a colleague that I worked with took our results and eventually the results sort of showed up in a VP's briefing to the whole organization, it's like it changed minds, right? It
mm,
wasn't said or anything, but it's just like, the research was dispelled and it did really help. So that's one way. And I might have forgotten the second one. Uh, um, I think it'll come to me. But yeah, your question was like, how do you show the value, right?
yeah. How do you convince other people who are not familiar with the process?
Right, right.
On the
Yes. So, oh yeah, one is yeah, working with somebody and that they could see it tangibly. I think the
Mhm.
second one, which I love, um, is if you have somebody and if you have somebody on the product team who, and this happens in all the companies, who's really heads down, they're making all their decisions and they're sort of making in a bubble. We have found it very helpful to invite everybody on the product team to a session where we talk to a user, our customer, or watch them use our product. And oftentimes just seeing a customer or user struggle with something they thought was amazing, where they're like, no, 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 do this task that way. Like, why aren't you getting it? And seeing somebody struggle but maybe having that empathy, like, okay, I can see why they're struggling because there's this. Um, that connecting them with in the same room, so to speak, with a user or customer using their product, I think is very powerful. Like it's that aspect of human empathy that we can tap into.
Right, right.
So they see the value. Like they're like, oh, hey, well, thank you very much for making it easy for me to connect with this person because I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it with my own eyes.
Mm. And where would you suggest people to recruit users? I mean, of course, as a big company, it's probably easier, but as a smaller company, where do you find these people, right?
Yeah. No, we're there's you could hire an agency, but we have done less of that because of the price. So we've built up our own participant pool. So
Hmm.
often through customers, through our social network, through people we know. Recruiting is hard. It's even hard for researchers who've done this professionally for 20 years. It's still a chore that nobody likes,
Uh-huh.
but it takes time to do it correctly. So we have to be super creative.
Mm,
Um, the key is really to first think about who would give you the best information,
mm,
and then try to get to those people first. So, for example, if you're if like we work on enterprise software, so we don't generally ask for feedback from consumers just because it won't give us that. So we focus on that particular role, the IT admin, and it takes a lot more time, but we focus on them because their feedback is a lot more meaningful for us. So I think when you're talking about recruiting, it really depends on who your users are, being as trying to get the best, the 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 people who best represent the people you're trying to design for, and getting their feedbacks. Sometimes it will be easy, sometimes it will be really hard.
So when you say you have your own pool of users, like what do you mean? Do you have a platform that hosts them, or?
Yeah, we have a program to essentially like to ask uh, ask well, essentially we ask if people are interested, and we ask them in various ways, and I can get to that, of joining our panel, where we can notify them of studies. And so we do this through like a web page on our product sites, but also we've had sort of newsletter campaigns, and even our products have a link to that to encourage people.
Mm.
Um, and so people have the ability to know what's involved, and then to sign up and say, hey, yes, I'm interested in being notified. The tools we use are not fancy at all, but it's really just to make sure that we properly inform people about what they're signing up for, giving them the ability to opt out, and just when we notify them about studies, just making sure that they know what's involved, and making it okay for them to not take part. So I
Mm.
think it's more a process for us than a system.
Oh, okay. And do you compensate them?
Hmm. Yeah.
Also, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. One other thing I was curious is, like, as a Korean company, are there any methodologies that would be different for Asia versus North America? Like, for example, like, does culture affect
Yeah.
how you research? Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I think um, I mean, there's language. That's a big one. So for sure, you want to have somebody who's ideally who would like, if I'm talking to somebody in Korea, ideally it's somebody who speaks Korean, just so that there isn't that translation that's needed. And I think that um, there's also um, sort of relationship dynamics just to be aware of. So when you're a researcher, you know, for sure there is a power difference, right? When you have somebody come in, when you ask them a question, you're sort of asking sort of as an authority. And so in some cultures, they might not care. Like, okay, I'll just tell you what I think. And there's some other cultures who may be a bit more conforming, or have more sort of, they would defer more to the authority. They would tell you what they think you want to hear. And
Mm,
so as a researcher, you have to be aware of that, and make it very easy for people to speak freely. So
mm,
one thing that we do, and it sort of works globally, but it matters for some people more than others, which is I tell them, like, it's not about you, like, you're the expert. I'm not looking for any right answers. I just, you know, you succeeding in this interview is by expressing what's on your mind. And I want to hear bad stuff as well. And that's going to be really useful for me. I
mm,
want you to sort of, like, it's fine if you hate our product, like that's helpful. And so I just sort of set the tone so that they don't have to worry about saying something that I wasn't looking for.
yeah.
So I've seen other sort of less experienced researchers who are like, I have this product that I've been working on for like 5 years. Do you like it? And of course you're like, what are people going to say, right? Like, so
Yeah.
just being careful, and making space, and just understanding that, like, some cultures, will, and you're sort of inviting them as a guest. Some people will have some expectations and have some default behaviors that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, like, especially, like, for example, some Asian cultures, like, I know in South Korea, like, you know, women and men might not have the same status, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you do you have to assign a certain gender to interview another gender? Like,
That's interesting. I mean, maybe you might have to do that. I think maybe also there's that level of like for example, if I were to interview like so hierarchy at the company matters quite a bit,
mm,
and I think there'd probably be some dynamic if I was interviewing like an executive from like an Asian company where that matters. Um, and I think I'd have to sort of try to try to either find the right person or to sort of level set to make it easy for that person to best answer freely. I think
mm,
ultimately that's the key, is so that they can answer freely.
right, right, right. Okay, great. Well, I think, we can open up the floor and have people ask their question. I see a lot of questions. Um, is it Jasmine or Gregory? You want to help pick out who goes next?
I can read the first one.
Okay.
Um, from Kylie, there was a question: what is the difference between a UX researcher and UX analyst? When it comes to user research, how do the roles differ?
Yeah, so great question. I think it points to the fact that you have many different job descriptions: research analyst, research UX researcher, design researcher, um, even market researcher. I think one thing that I've noticed about the community is that there is a lot of overlap in terms. And so in some companies, maybe that doesn't matter at all between researcher and analyst. In some companies, it might be very specific. Analyst just does analysis. Maybe it suggests quantitative analysis. They don't actually talk to the users. So I think it differs from company to company. It really depends on the job description itself. So that's what I would pay attention to.
Okay, thank you for the answer. The next one is from Catherine McLean. She's asking, what's the best way for people coming from academia to gain UXR experience for a portfolio when entering the job market?
Yeah. So I know that that is a challenge, and we talked about this a little bit, Elaine, as we were starting up. Is like, how do you pivot? How do you get that experience so that you can have that portfolio to start off with? Um, I think there's the two recommendations I would make. One is to try to get experience however you can. It could be volunteering um, with a reputable nonprofit that does really great work that you have um, that you respect. Like for example, one of the students I had, they volunteered at TEDx and they did a research project there. You can also maybe you could freelance. You could do a project for a company that you know through some personal connection, or you could sign up with the agency. I know that they're definitely needing a lot of help these days. And so I would say try to get experience however you can, but try to do the project, this research project, as properly as you can, sort of following the various steps, understanding you might not do it properly, but it's very thoughtful and methodical. And I think the second, I think, recommendation I would make is that, and I sort of maybe can relate to this well. I have a PhD in human computer interaction, and a PhD in academia is it's a lot of investment of time, and you have a lot of training and specialization. Um, but that doesn't mean that I translate easily to a senior position. Um, Even though I think my technical skills are, my research skills are, I have quite a bit of experience with that. So for me, and something for you to consider is to get your foot in the door wherever you can, maybe in a more junior role than you might expect, as long as it's a good fit and you can learn. Um, I have found myself that it was easy for me to grow and to progress within a company and to take on more and more, maybe faster than I expected. And so I can imagine that somebody switching from academia could also do that, that they get a foot in the door in a company, um, maybe junior if they don't have much intermediate industry experience, or maybe it's intermediate or so on. But then taking on leadership positions, just taking on different projects, and really doing some great useful research can really help, so that once you're in that company, you can flourish very quickly. So that would be my two suggestions there.
Thank you. Next question I'm gonna read is from Michelle Henley. What are your best tips for creating a presentation or report that really sells the research results?
Yeah, so this is really about getting your research to land, and ultimately the best research is research that has influenced the decision making, that some change in the company, whether it's like in a product or how they do things, resulted in the research. So this is where maybe me not being a designer, um, but research actually has a design component to it, which is, um, it's really important to understand who you're communicating your findings to. So it is actually a design exercise as well internally, where I'm creating deliverables or some documents or something to communicate the findings and essentially trying to influence decisions. It's really up to me to understand who it is I'm talking to, what's important to them. Do they like lots of detail, little detail? Do they like something very shiny and slick, or very straight to the point? Do videos help more? Are they about stories? I'll share an example. And then, like, one time, I had an assumption of this stakeholder where I was like, okay, hey, I did this research, and I know you might not buy the findings, but I have all this detail, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk about methodology, and I'm going to show you the data, quotes, and numbers that back this up. And I remember I was giving this presentation to this person, and I was going through my slides, and this person was almost falling asleep. Like, they were just not interested. And ultimately, at the end of the presentation, the person was just like, okay, just tell me what you want me to do. Like, just give me a list of your recommendations. That's really all I care about. I'm too busy to sort of look through the details. And so in that, I learned in that case that, yeah, some people love detail and they like the context, but some people, they will trust that, you did your due diligence, and whether that's warranted or not, that's another question. But that they want to know the findings so that they can act on it and move on. So what you create for them just really depends on who they are and what they need to be convinced, because everybody's different. I think that's the hard part. But I think as UX professionals, like, we're really equipped to handle that difference and that messiness.
Thanks. Next, can I read the next question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Next question is from Jared Kellerman. He's asking, do you have any perspective on how much it's quite a long question, by the way. Do you have any perspective on how much a degree like PhD or master's influences hiring decisions and available job opportunities? I ask because I've been getting the sense that there's a not insignificant number of people leaving academia to get into UXR, perhaps making it more challenging to find an entry-level role for those without an advanced degree. Please feel free to challenge the assumption if I'm wrong.
I think that having a graduate degree helps, but I don't think that getting a graduate degree is the best way to get into research, UX research. At least there's many many jobs and companies who might not value that. I have noticed that there are companies where it's a bit more, maybe the research team is a bit more established, and they have a better idea of like what makes for a senior, and they have the different roles. And in those cases, I think when you have a lot of researchers, um, like I think a degree does matter, and I think in companies like Meta and Google and so on, like a PhD or a master's degree does help. But I think that there are just as many other companies where it doesn't. They care about um, your past experience, what you can show for it, um, and they care less about the research papers and more about like what products you were able to influence, and who you know, and who can be a reference. So I think there's room for both, and just maybe be aware that in some cases they do really value an advanced degree. Um, but in some cases, like it's almost like it's who you know, it's what the community has thought of you. Did you sort of develop some kind of reputation as doing great work, or being a speaker maybe at some of these, like that matters for some companies as well. So I would say just work with what you have. Um, I think I really am glad I did a graduate degree, and I have grown a lot through it. I don't necessarily, I didn't do that to become a UX researcher, and it was more for my own interest. And so I used what I had. So I would recommend that for where you're at right now. Just use what you have.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna read the next one from Megan. She's asking that you mentioned that you're involved in B2B UX research. And the question is there any difference in research in B2C and B2B environments?
Yeah, the answer is for sure. Big difference is not in the methods. We use the same methods. We have to just check our own biases and things like that as we would in any field. But the access to the to customers and users is much harder in B2B. I've just read this across many companies. It's just much harder, so much more work. And also, the other big difference too, well, I thought it was interesting, maybe you might too, is for B2B, the person who's buying the product might not be the person who's using the product. So you might have a team or a business manager, line of business manager, so on, who's actually paying for that solution, and that you definitely want to sell the value there, but they might not actually be using it, or maybe there's other people on their team who's a more active user, and you have to design for them as well. So that's also a unique thing about B2B that's not there in B2C, where a consumer generally buys what they're going to use.
Oh, for B2B research, we've had some really interesting experience, especially in Asia, because when you tell them you want access to users, I find you have to be very specific. Otherwise, the salespeople usually think that you need to meet senior level people who are decision makers,
Yes, that's right.
right? And then you find yourself in a conference room. It's like,
Yeah.
those are not real users, right?
No, because for sales, they care about the decision makers. Yeah, like yeah, sure they care about the users themselves, but the person who's making the purchase is the decision maker. So
Yeah.
we care about both.
Right. And also we find that sometimes especially in Asia, decision makers think, oh, research, I don't have to be involved. Like, you guys down there do that, right? Like how do you solve that problem?
Yeah, that one is hard because I see that all the time. Busy people sort of saying like I don't really have time for that. A lot of times we have to bring the user or the customer to that executive, so to speak. So
Mm.
make it easy for them to connect. I've heard of some sort of very forward-looking companies where they'll do field trips, ethnographic, so to speak, trips where they would invite sort of executives to come out and make it just a very great experience. There's some sort of event planning there. So that's one way. But the other way could be just bring videos and snapshots and impactful quotes. B2B is interesting too in that like the bigger companies often have more weight. So saying that this came from a big name customer carries a lot of weight.
Mm, okay.
Uh,
Yep.
we got we got another question from Michelle. As you interview users, how do you parse what they say, knowing that they often say what they think you want to hear?
Yeah, yeah. I think some more concrete tips on how we just encourage people is essentially by communicating to them is what I want to hear is what you're feeling and that you're the expert. I don't know half of what you do, so to speak. Um, so it's like really just deferring to the fact that they are the expert, and there's a reason why they are here because we want to learn from them, and and just and I guess just being proactive in that there might be some things that they might not think is good to share, but if it's useful for you, just to encourage that. So we will often, I'll say the line, just like, both positive and critical feedback is very, very useful for us. So please share that. So encouraging encouraging them to say something that maybe they think is not good. The other bit too is just to watch your responses to the feedback. So let's say you hear somebody, they're like, "Oh, sorry, like this is actually a pain. Like, actually, I hate your product." As a researcher, you could be like, "Oh, really?" Like, but often what I try to do is like, "Oh, that's super interesting. Like, thank you for sharing that. Like, can you please tell me more?" And just being excited to hear the truth, essentially. So I think it's the tone that you set in the interview of um, encouraging just for them to speak freely, and also there's your tone, and then there's also watching out for your colleagues who are listening in. um, yeah, there's so many times where I'm trying to coach them a little bit, like going into this. It's just like, okay, try not to ask questions like, that just tells you about how awesome your product is. Like, you might want that, but please, like, let's try to be objective, and we really want to learn from this, not just have them say our product is awesome. So there's a lot of just, sort of setting the stage for everybody to just learn from the person.
Thank you for the answer. The next question is from Emre. Emre, sorry if I pronounced it wrong. What courses or certificates can you recommend for new UXRs transitioning from academia?
I think there's a lot of useful certificates, and I'm sure there's a lot that are really solid. I think that, I mean, as somebody sort of hires for it, I think I would think that's pretty good to have that, but I would sort of test the person's knowledge through the work they've done and through how they think through things. So I think I would view all this training as the ability to learn and to get the fundamentals, and that's more valuable than the certificate itself. So I often will just look at somebody's work and how they respond to how I sort of ask them of the limitations and have they thought of this. And usually when we talk through their thought process, I know it's quite subjective, but usually we get a sense of like, well, how much experience do they have? How much maturity do they have in doing research and design, things like that? So a certificate for sure helps, but I think that's the vehicle to get this maturity and this experience.
Mhm. Chichi is asking, what are indicators of an effective plan? What components does a plan need to have? Are there any templates available?
Yeah, so there's definitely a template that I recommend. So it's one by Tomer Sharon. He wrote It's Our Research, and it's a one-page plan, which I really like. It's been quite effective. One page is nice because you share it with your stakeholders and it's all in one place. It makes it accessible. Um, so what are the components? The goal, the background, sort of who the stakeholders are, your method, and the timeline. But at sort of a bullet point, at really a summary level, just so for them, for your stakeholders to understand why you're doing this. And then also you can have more detail later, but it's useful just to have that captured in a document so that we're all on the same page before we move forward. So yeah, I would look at that. This one-page report by Tomer Sharon.
Thank you. And next question from Rebecca. What are the technical skills required for the job? Do you need strong math skills in order to succeed in UX research?
Math skills help essentially to I mean, research and analysis, it's helpful to have some basic statistical skills to understand sort of why sort of a smaller number of participants and like is why that's might be suitable in some cases but not others. Um, it is some kind of fluency that's important to know. I don't do a lot of math in my work. It's not it's you know I'm not sort of calculating regressions and using statistical packages and stuff like that. But I think that that math knowledge comes really in handy in terms of evaluating good research. I would say the technical skills, I think in my mind, those teachable skills are really like using the various methods, interviewing, writing a survey, running different methods. I would see those as technical skills, which you can learn, but for sure you can, the more you do it, the better you get. And of course, the feedback is really important. So I think, you know, those, you try to find projects that help you with those. But at the same time, remember the soft skills. Those are equally important. Um, you know, it's just collaboration, communication, writing well, summarizing well, you know, delivering presentations effectively. That's also very, very important for a researcher.
Oh, a related question. It's in terms of math skills is now with big data, uh, there are some companies that are also using more, data analysis, right?
Yeah.
Like how, like, do you see a trend in that direction, like versus the qualitative small sample kind of exploratory? Like what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I see a trend towards companies using more and more data. Um, I also see as companies get, so this is like sort of bigger and more mature, that they will invest in both big data and in sort of the high touch. You're talking to the customer directly. The, there are two different types of information for you. Like big data is really like it's abstracted. You have data from a ton of people, but you've removed a lot of context, and that's why you can summarize it and analyze and parse it as you can. That is great for understanding how a group does things, but oftentimes it doesn't talk about the why or the context behind understanding it. So, you know, qualitative, so to speak, or like, you know, customer user research, we do the hard work of talking to people directly, and it's not super scalable if you think about it, you know. But it's really important to know the whys. So I think the trend is you have both in a company and they're collaborating together.
Mm,
I don't foresee one taking over the other.
great to know.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think there are a few more questions.
Yeah, question from Sammy. How could we present research findings honestly in a company that combat selective reporting bias when some stakeholders just want to hear good stuff and not feeling bad? Would you have any effective storytelling techniques to recommend? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I see that all the time. Um, I in the past, I'll tell you what I tried that hasn't really worked. In the past, I tried to sell research equally to everybody, and was more disappointed when some people would not get it. And I you know, maybe I still find that too. But I find that what I do is I make access equal to everybody so that I'm not shielding anybody from the data. And whenever I present, I share to everybody. But I think that there's there are some people that are just gonna it's just gonna be much easier to work with and to actually achieve something. And so I have actually spent a lot less time trying to convince somebody who is hard to convince. And I sort of just I sort of just you know, if they need help, and I will, but I do focus less on them. I have some stakeholders who, some colleagues who I really like as a person, I work well with, but I know that some of the research questions that they ask me are not going to lead anywhere, and they're actually going to be a waste of time for everybody. And so I do focus more on the stakeholders where if they have some work that they're willing to take the findings and take it the next mile. Like they'll take my research and then they're going to tell the VP about it. I could never have done that. And they take the work and they just amplify it so much. So I'm spending a lot more time focused on their needs because I think just the collaboration is just easier and more effective. And for for the people who I have to spend so much time convincing and it doesn't go anywhere, it's just not a great great use of time for anybody. So yeah, so I've actually stopped trying to convince them myself. I try to let the work sort of show the value themselves, and hopefully they'll see from the change in culture around them that it's like, hey, this is valuable for them too.
So don't bark up the wrong tree, right?
Yes, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Okay, question from Vinny. I'm going to my fourth year in interaction design. What do you recommend me in terms of what I should be looking at and doing more in my fourth year if I want to steer to user research?
I think get as much experience as you can, and yeah, back to my point earlier, is find somebody who's better at it than you, and be open to getting their feedback. So in my team, I am the most senior person in my research team, and I think in my organization for research. But we have a culture of just getting feedback, and so I will ask my team all the time, like, "Hey, I just designed this survey, and can you please look at it from with fresh eyes, and just tell me how I can improve it?" And there's never been a case where they couldn't find anything and they found it's perfect. Like they've they've identified a dozen things that I could have improved, and that's actually really good. That's it. We help each other be better. So I think that in your when you're going through school, getting feedback is sometimes very humbling, and it's hard to take, but it both improves your skills and then it improves the product and your work. So I would say maybe that's my suggestion, which is like consider just the humility to find somebody who's better than you and get feedback and allow them just to point out the weaknesses in your work, and you'll be better for it in the long run.
Okay, we have only 2 questions left. Kaylee's asking, what are your opinions of concept pieces in portfolios? Some designers can put real stuff in their portfolio due to data privacy reasons.
Yeah, this is a good one about portfolios, and I think this also has a bit of tie to academic work as well. When I ask people to describe their projects, the more real it is, the more I can assess their experience and their maturity. So I think school projects are great in that it teaches you and it can help you learn to do things. But a lot of the constraints are quite artificial, and you def you you don't really have a lot of the stakeholders that we have in industry. Oftentimes in school projects, everybody's sort of taking the same course and everybody's the same. Whereas in industrial work, like usually the people who you're working with are totally different and have a different viewpoint. So I think conceptual work I think is fine, but what I'm looking for is like real world, like research in the real world settings. Even though it's hard, it's messy, you have to make a lot of compromises, and there was a lot of constraints. I actually put more value on those experiences to talk through and better understand how your work and your way of doing things will fit into my work. So I would say try to find something real and something impactful.
Mhm. Okay, and we reached the final question. PK is asking, what are some tools, software that you use in your work, like Figma, R, etc.? What do you think are essential for UX researchers?
So tools is a good question. So we do use tools like Figma, like the design and the whiteboarding tools. But I think we can use any tool. Like the tool itself is really just a tool to achieve something. Um, when I started, it was just like a laptop and Microsoft Office and some conferencing tool, and that was enough to do a lot of good work. So um, tools will help. It will help to save time, but I think that it's very secondary. I feel like just we are blessed with so many different tools that that's usually not the bottleneck. It's really accessing users, just doing really good analysis and getting good data.
Do you use like mural boards? Or Miro or yeah.
Yeah, like Figma has a sort of equivalent to that. Yeah, so we use
Okay.
that.
I see. Okay. Well, one last question for me. What do you think has changed with COVID? Because now people are kind of allergic to meeting strangers somehow. It used to
Yeah.
be we go to people's homes and do ethnographic research sort of thing.
Yeah.
How do you see things changing?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the particular design space. For us, it hasn't affected, but our target user is so specific. It's a global audience. They're already technically savvy. So it hasn't really affected us.
Mm,
We haven't been going into their workplaces, but for sure it will affect any type of design space and team where they have to meet with the person, they enter their homes, they have to meet with them or have them come in. Um, that definitely, COVID definitely makes things more challenging that way.
mm,
Um, I think there's been a higher acceptance of like using remote tools, but yeah, that has its pros and cons as well.
mm.
So I don't. That probably didn't answer your question, but it depends so much on the design space.
Right, right, right. Okay. Any last questions? We're almost time's up, but thank you so much, Rock. It was, a pleasure and so much insights, especially I think for the younger people who wants to enter the industry. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, it was a pleasure for me.
And let's take a photo with everyone. Can we have everyone open their cameras? Okay.
Everybody looks good.
Okay. Well. I think we have more. We have a lot more. Do you want to turn your camera before we press the button? Yay. Okay. Ready. Cheese. Thanks, guys. All right. Thank you so much, Rock, for your time. And
Thanks, everybody.
yeah. Oh, one last thing. How do people get in touch with you?
I think the best is LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay. Yeah. And your company has co-op, right? Like
Yes.
you take co-op. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much, Elaine. This was fun.
Thank you. Thanks, Rock. Thanks, everyone. Bye.